Ah, good evening, and welcome back to Explorations Through Time. As always, I am Noah, and I will be your humble shaman through the cosmos. I would like to begin tonight with the concept of entropy, the universe's drive towards disorder. This concept can, of course, be extrapolated to the drive of mankind. It is those who dare to disrupt the status quo, the societal order and structure that serve as the catalyst for progress. See, our planet is home to more than 6 billion people, and over the course of its roughly 4 billion years, life forms have appeared and subsequently disappeared in the relative time frame of nanoseconds. Out of all these life forms, few have dared to rattle the societal cages into which we are all cast. Individuals like Caesar and Darwin, Newton, Mozart, Einstein, Neil Armstrong are just a few that come to mind. So will we be exploring every single one of these individuals and their socio-political impact on the development of civilization? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. That's so time consuming. I just read a fucking book. However, today we'll be focusing on one man, a true agent of anarchy, a one David Allen Sorka. Come with me. Our story begins in Bergenfield, New Jersey, where David was brought into this earth by Pearl and Harvey Sorko, an Ashkenazi couple, on the 4th of August of 1960. By all historical accounts, his own mother, sensing the unbridled power that lay within him, attempted on numerous occasions to extinguish this flame by any means necessary. However, much like the witches of Salem, an infant David resisted the drowning attempts on his life. Accepting that the boy's strength outmatched her own, his mother resigned herself from his care, leaving nature to determine the boy's fate. However, in the darkness the boy flourished. In complete contrast to the published metabolic necessities of the body, a young David grew stronger in the absence of the vitamins provided by common household fruits and vegetables, surviving on hot dogs, bologna, yoo-hoo, and the delicacies of a Dan's Deli. Despite his feral upbringing, David engaged in the arts and in sport. An avid baseball and tennis player, a young David truly excelled when he picked up his first bugle. See, David grew to become a prodigious trumpeter, performing in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade before he could legally pilot an automobile. However, the humble trumpet was unable to absorb the boy's energy in its entirety. Burdened by his gift, David, much like a young James Hendricks or Jonathan Cash, fell prey to a life of debauchery. It all began with his first dirt bike. In fact, the story of David cannot be told in its entirety without the mention of the motorcycle, as the two are so intertwined. See, the motorcycle is a representation of freedom and excitement. It's the transportation equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, or the equivalent of rolling down the passenger side window of one's car to bark at pedestrians, or, of course, the transportation equivalent of cutting a mean fart right before exiting a crowded elevator. See, David and the motorcycle were one. Together, man and machine, they could not be tamed. Much like the daring adventurers racing in Dakar, David traversed the woods, beaches, and, in flagrant violation of the law of the turnpike, of his home state of New Jersey. Despite his run-ins with legal authorities, David's taste for speed could not be quenched. However, as the 1970s drew to a close, the climate in Bergen County began to heat up. With his father's position as a judge potentially on the line and a crackdown on other various activities, David knew it was time for him to leave. He packed his van and set out west. David found himself at the University of Arizona, known to many scholars as the Harvard of the West, with the intent to study law. But at the onset of his legal pursuits, he found that Arizona was, at this time, void of most laws, and like the great poet Horace, David chose to carpe diem. Guns, motorcycles, women, and other things that cannot be spoken about on public access television per an injunction by the FCC all became the norm for this ex-Jerseyite. Free from any authoritative supervision, David spread chaos throughout the Sun Belt of the United States. Bound only by the volume constraints of his gas tank, David and his assembled crew of scallywags roamed the interstates from Arizona to New Mexico to Nevada and California. Recognizing his passions for freedom and that which is mechanical, he chose to forego law school and instead begin working with motorcycles. Having slowly amassed a cult following of people who have heard of his exploits, David became well known in the motorcycle community. Rising through the ranks of the vehicular rebels, David excelled in fixing and selling motorcycles and began to include cars as well. However, his life of excess began to catch up with him. David began to fall prey to his own vices. But much like fate had a plan for the boy whilst his mother held his infant head under the bathwater, the forces of the universe still had plans for David. Set up on a blind date with a young woman by the name of Patty, David began to feel for the first time. Over ice cream at Baskin-Robbins, Patty changed David's life. The relationship grew, flourished, and Patty took to helping David fight off his demons. In a final ultimatum that saved his life, Patty forced David to choose between his two loves, herself and cocaine. Choosing the former, they would go on to elope. But it was also during the tumultuous beginnings of their relationship that the forces to be attempted to snuff out such a bright spark in the cosmic void. However, instead of his addictive tendencies or the firm hand of a Pearl Sorko, the universe attempted to snuff out David's flame via the humble platelet. But David is a fighter, and having survived being drowned, struck by vehicles, thrown off mountain roads, deprived of essential vitamins, and insufflating an unknown number of chemical compounds, an autoimmune disorder was no match for him. With his newfound health and marriage, David finally settled back in Arizona after bouncing between California and Colorado briefly. It is here that he would go on to have a handsome, intelligent, athletic, witty Adonis of a son, and a daughter as well. These children provided David with an outlet for his energy. He worked from home to care for his children and began to learn how to love once more. It is important to note that at this time, via real estate and the inters of web, people throughout the United States were coming into exorbitant amounts of wealth overnight. Gauging this economic climate and with an entrepreneurial spirit only rivaled by that of the Gilded Age of these United States, David created a business to supply the wealthy with high-end vehicles. With a loan co-signed for by his own father, his business quickly grew to prominence. Soon, David found himself on the road most nights, transporting cars to California and returning with a bountiful profit. He provided an excellent living for his family for years. However, with the housing market collapse in 2008, David's income was quickly reduced. Times became more difficult. But even under the stress of financial destitution and grave health issues in both of his children, David weathered the storm with a smile on his face, never allowing his children to understand the gravity of their situation. But as is history, it is often darkest before the dawn. His children were able to recover from their respective ailments, and their financial situation began to restabilize. But David did not want to fall prey to the greed that often follows initial financial success, a pitfall he had almost been ensnared by earlier. Instead, inspired by the motorcycles that had shaped his development, David began to search out the bikes of his youth for restoration. Rare sport bikes from throughout the annals of recent history began to accumulate in the workshop that lay beneath his dwelling. These bikes connected him with people around the globe, from Pebble Beach, California, to Canada to Japan, greatly expanding his sphere of influence. As his children went off to embark upon their respective careers, he has refound his purpose in the preservation of the technology that made him who he is. Though what are now considered vintage bikes had brought David freedom, self-discovery, and self-actualization. As I had said prior, you cannot tell the story of David Sorko without the mention of the motorcycle. It is a tool that was able to channel the brilliance and the chaotic energy of a loose cannon to form a life of joy, love, friendship, and family. Through his bike, David brought together father and son by trail riding through the woods of New Jersey. And again in the following generation, alongside the cliffside highways of Northern California. He brought together father and daughter on the hard-packed dirt of Southern Arizona. He facilitated the formation of friendships that traversed the highways of the United States in all cardinal directions. Friendships that are not bound by time nor mortality. He uses his bike to fuel the flame of a married couple racing around the curves of Tucson's Catalina Mountains. So on his 60th birthday, the 4th of August 2020, it is important to reflect back on how this one man, in a complete rejection of societal norms, stayed true to himself and his passions, and as a result, created a larger-than-life legacy that the world is eager to continue to see grow. With his love of speed still very much intact, David shows no signs of slowing down, especially not around the corners. Happy birthday, Dad.